Some days even the brightest stars in the sky feel like they're fading. That thought feels strange at first, doesn't it? When we look at someone like Johnny Depp, we see a man who has lived under the spotlight for most of his life. We think of the fame, the flashing cameras, the screaming fans outside hotel doors, the long lines of people dressed up as Captain Jack Sparrow at movie premieres. It all paints a picture of a man who could never feel overlooked. And yet, Johnny himself admits something that sounds almost unbelievable. He says, "Some days I feel invisible." The words are quiet, almost fragile, but they carry the weight of decades. And when you hear them, you pause. You can't help but wonder how a man who has been one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces could feel that way. But the more you sit with it, the more it begins to make sense, because fame, as dazzling as it looks from the outside, doesn't always cure loneliness. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse. Johnny's life is full of contradictions. He has been both celebrated and criticized, adored and condemned, lifted up and torn down. On one side of his life, there's the magic of his films. Think of the quirky, unforgettable characters he has brought to life: Captain Jack Sparrow with his slurred words and unpredictable swagger, Edward Scissorhands, silent yet heartbreakingly expressive, the Mad Hatter, bizarre and colorful yet deeply sad behind the painted smile. These characters made him a legend. They turned him into a man audiences across the world couldn't ignore. But then there's the other side, the personal life that has been dragged through the mud by tabloids and courtroom battles. The endless stories, debates, arguments, and judgments about who he is behind closed doors. For years, his face wasn't just on movie posters. It was plastered across headlines, memes, social media debates, and news panels. And when you think about it, that kind of attention isn't the same as being seen. Because being seen means people look at you. What Johnny got was people looking at his reflection, an image shaped by gossip, controversy, and opinion. And that's where his confession makes sense, because he doesn't mean invisible in the literal sense. He means invisible in the way so many of us have felt at some point in our lives. You show up, you give everything you can, you speak your truth, and yet somehow people don't see the real you. They see the version of you that fits their expectations. They see the mask you wear, and for Johnny, those masks have been endless. Movie roles, magazine covers, courtroom snapshots. Everyone saw something. But who saw him? It's the kind of paradox that only someone at the top could really describe. Surrounded by millions, yet feeling utterly unseen. It's a loneliness that fame can't fix. If anything, it makes it sharper. Imagine standing on a stage with thousands of people screaming your name and then walking off into the quiet of your hotel room, where suddenly it's just you. No one asking how you're really doing. No one who cares about Johnny, the man, rather than Depp, the actor. Insiders close to him have described this side of Johnny that most fans never see. They say that even when he's on tour with his band, playing his heart out on stage, there are nights where he slips away into himself. Picture it. The music pounding, the crowd roaring, his guitar vibrating in his hands. And then later, backstage, the energy fading, he sits quietly in a corner, withdrawn, pensive. A man adored by thousands, but still questioning if he's truly understood. That's the kind of contradiction that eats at a person. And it's not just speculation. Johnny himself has admitted that art is the way he copes with these feelings. Acting may have made him famous, but music, painting, and writing are what keep him grounded. He once said that when words fail him, his guitar speaks for him. That's not just a poetic phrase, it's a survival mechanism. Music becomes the place where he feels honest, where he can be himself without worrying about the cameras or the critics. If you think about it, that's probably why so many of his roles have leaned into the misunderstood, the eccentric, the outcast. Because maybe deep down he saw parts of himself in those characters. Edward Scissorhands, isolated and judged for being different. Jack Sparrow, ridiculed yet cunningly aware of how others misjudge him. Even the Mad Hatter, who hides pain behind absurdity. Could it be that Johnny felt invisible long before he admitted it out loud? Could it be that acting those roles was his way of showing us pieces of himself that he couldn't say in interviews? And this brings us to another layer of his confession. Psychologists who study celebrity culture often talk about this very phenomenon. They say that fame can trap a person in extremes. You're either idolized or demonized, praised or criticized. But in both cases, you stop being a person. You become a symbol of success, a symbol of scandal, a symbol of whatever narrative the public wants to see. And in that process, the person inside disappears. They become invisible. That's exactly what has happened to Johnny. Through the highs and lows of his career, through the storms of public opinion, he's been reduced to symbols. For some fans, he's the untouchable pirate who made them laugh and dream. For others, he's the headline they argue about on social media. But for Johnny himself, there are days when he wonders if anyone sees the man behind all of that. The father who loves his children. The artist who finds joy in sketching alone in his studio. The musician who pours his soul into a guitar riff. When he says he feels invisible, he's not just describing loneliness. He's describing a deep need that every human has. The need to be seen and understood for who they are, not who the world decides they should be. And that's why his confession resonates with so many people. Because haven't we all felt that way at some point? Haven't we all wondered if anyone really sees us beyond the masks we wear for work, family, or friends? Johnny's words remind us that visibility doesn't equal value. You can be the most recognized person in the room and still feel invisible if no one truly knows your heart. And ironically, that's the same truth that applies to all of us. You don't need to be a Hollywood actor to know what that feels like. You could be in a family where your efforts go unnoticed. You could be at a job where you give everything and still feel unseen. You could be surrounded by friends and still wonder if they'd notice if you disappeared. That's why Johnny's confession isn't just a celebrity story. It's a human story. And it also explains why he leans so heavily on his creative outlets, because those are the spaces where he doesn't feel invisible. When he's painting, every brushstroke is his voice. When he's strumming a guitar, every note is a heartbeat. Those are the moments where he doesn't have to fight to be seen, because the art speaks louder than headlines ever could. Now, looking ahead, Johnny does have new film projects lined up. Fans are eager, almost restless, waiting for his comeback, wondering what kind of roles he'll step into next. For so many people, the anticipation isn't just about seeing him back on the big screen. It's about something deeper. It's about whether these roles will reveal more of Johnny himself, or simply add another mask on top of the many masks he's worn throughout his life. Because let's be honest, Johnny Depp has never been the kind of actor who disappears quietly into predictable roles. He has always gravitated toward characters who are odd, eccentric, unpredictable, and layered. That's what made him different. That's what made him legendary. But there's also a question hiding in that legacy. Has he been using these characters as shields? Have they been a way for him to hide the man inside, the one who feels invisible even when the world is looking straight at him? And that's what makes his confession so haunting. When he says, "Some days I feel invisible," it's not just about the past. It's not only about the controversies, the courtrooms, or the media storms that painted him in 1,000 different ways. It's also about his future. What happens next for Johnny Depp? When he steps back into the world of film, will he finally allow the world to see the man behind the characters? Or will the next chapter of his career simply add another layer of performance, another mask, another version of himself that isn't quite him? That uncertainty is part of why fans are so emotionally invested. People aren't just asking when his next movie will come out. They're asking something deeper. Who will Johnny be now? And maybe that's because for years people have felt like they lost him. The world watched him disappear into characters, then into scandals, then into silence. At times he felt unreachable, as though the man behind the headlines had gone into hiding, and now with his return on the horizon, there's hope. Hope that the Johnny who emerges won't just be another role. Hope that it will be him. But the truth is, it's not an easy path. When an actor has built a career on masks, how do you suddenly take them off? When the world has grown used to seeing you as a pirate, or a Mad Hatter, or a misunderstood outsider, how do you convince them to look at you without the costume, without the makeup, without the safety net of fiction? That's the challenge Johnny faces now, and it's a challenge that speaks to something bigger than Hollywood, because don't we all, in some way, struggle with the same thing? Don't we all wear masks at work, with family, even with friends? Masks that protect us, that help us fit in, that shield us from judgment. But then there comes a moment when we wonder if anyone truly knows us, and that's where invisibility creeps in. The same invisibility Johnny has confessed to. So when we look at his future, we're not just curious about his movies. We're curious about whether Johnny himself will step out from behind the masks, whether he'll let the world see the man who has carried all this pain, all this contradiction, and all this silence for so long. And let's not forget, Hollywood loves a comeback. It thrives on redemption arcs. Fans love to see someone fall only to rise again. But Johnny's comeback isn't just about proving people wrong or reclaiming a career. It feels like it's about something more personal, something more fragile. It's about reclaiming himself. Because at 60, Johnny is no longer the young outsider who stormed into Hollywood with raw talent and defiance. He's a man who has lived through storms, who has lost and rebuilt, who has been celebrated and ridiculed in equal measure. And maybe, just maybe, that's what gives him a chance to finally show the world who he really is. Think about it. Some of the greatest performances in history come not from actors trying to impress, but from those who have lived enough to strip away the illusions. Could Johnny's next roles be the most honest of his career? Could they finally reflect the man, not the mask? That's what so many are waiting to see. But of course, there's the risk that Hollywood itself won't let that happen. The industry has a way of typecasting, of turning people into brands rather than humans. And with Johnny, the temptation will always be there to lean on what worked in the past. The eccentric roles, the flamboyant costumes, the strange accents. Those are safe. They guarantee box office attention. But do they allow Johnny to be seen? Or do they keep him invisible, hiding behind yet another character? This is where the real heartbreak lies. Because when he said those words, "I feel invisible," he wasn't asking for more fame. He wasn't asking for bigger roles or brighter lights. He was asking for recognition, not as a star, but as a man. And that's the hardest thing for someone in his position to achieve. Because the world often forgets that celebrities are human. They forget that the person on screen goes home at night with doubts, fears, loneliness, and longings, just like the rest of us. So the question isn't just whether Johnny will make a comeback. The real question is, will his comeback finally allow him to be seen? Not as a pirate, not as a headline, but as Johnny. And maybe this is why his confession struck such a deep chord with so many fans. Because in his invisibility, they see themselves. They hear their own unspoken fears. They recognize that being visible isn't the same as being valued, and that's a truth that cuts across fame, wealth, and status. It's something we all feel at some point. The irony is that Johnny Depp, a man who has been one of the most visible people on the planet for decades, might also be the perfect symbol of how it feels to be unseen. His struggle is our struggle, just magnified under the brightest lights, and as he moves forward, that's what makes his journey so compelling. Because the audience isn't just waiting for another movie. They're waiting for an answer to a question that lingers in all of us. Will Johnny Depp ever be seen for who he really is? Or will invisibility continue to shadow him, no matter how many lights shine his way? The truth is, maybe he doesn't even know yet. Maybe that's what makes this moment in his life so fragile, so powerful, and so important. It's not just a comeback story. It's a human story. It's about whether a man who has spent his life creating illusions can finally step out of them. And it's about whether the world is ready to accept him, not as Jack Sparrow, not as the Mad Hatter, not as a scandal, but as Johnny Depp, the man who dares to admit that some days he feels invisible. And maybe, in the end, That's all he's ever wanted. To take off the mask, to put down the script, to stand in front of the world and be seen, not as a character, not as a symbol, just as himself, and that's where the reflection deepens. Because maybe invisibility isn't something he'll ever fully escape. Maybe it's not just the price of fame, but the shadow that comes with being so visible to the world. When millions of eyes are on you, but none of them see the real you, invisibility becomes a kind of prison. But maybe, just maybe, that's also where his strength lies. Because acknowledging it, saying it out loud, is a form of breaking free. It's admitting that even in the brightest spotlight there are shadows. And that's something everyone can understand. So when Johnny Depp whispers, "Some days I feel invisible," he's not just speaking about himself. He's speaking for all of us who have ever felt overlooked, for all of us who have ever doubted whether anyone notices the battles we fight quietly inside, for all of us who have ever felt like we're shouting into the void. And the truth is, those words stay with you long after you hear them, because they remind you that even the brightest stars in Hollywood, even the legends we put on pedestals, are still human. They still crave the same simple thing we all do: to be seen, to be understood, to be valued. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in his confession. That applause doesn't equal connection. That fame doesn't guarantee fulfillment. And that, no matter how many lights shine on you, sometimes the world's brightest stage can feel like the loneliest place on earth. So the question now is, will Johnny ever truly feel seen again? Or is this sense of invisibility something he'll carry with him for the rest of his life? That's a question only time can answer. But for now, one thing is certain. His words have opened a window into the heart of a man who has spent years behind masks, and for the first time, perhaps the world is beginning to see the man behind the legend. And as we reflect on his confession, maybe it's worth asking ourselves the same thing. Do we truly see the people around us? Do we notice their struggles, their quiet battles, their invisible pain? Or do we, like the tabloids, only see the masks they wear? Because in the end, Johnny Depp's story isn't just about Hollywood. It's about humanity, and his invisible days remind us that sometimes the most visible people in the world are the ones who feel unseen the most.